People always ask how I balance my family life with 400 shows a year. I'm just doing what I love with the people I love. It's my magic life.
I like Wes Iseli. I like everything about him.
All right, on today's episode, we have a magician who I was first aware of by watching his appearance on the World's Greatest Magic television show when I was growing up. Man, I watched it on a loop over and over and over. Then I was awestruck on our honeymoon when we were at the Magic Castle, and he was just in line behind us waiting to see a magic show. That's how I first met him in person. He's a talented magician, but you don't have to take my word for it. He was voted 2-time Parlor Magician of the Year at the world-famous Magic Castle. Everybody, it's Tom Ogden. What's up, buddy? How are you?
Hi, Wes. Yes, look at that. We're bumping into each other again. We should do that once every 20 years or so.
Tom, I'm telling you, man, I'm that little kid. I love magic. You know, watching World's Greatest Magic on a loop in my bedroom growing up. And then running into you in the castle, it was like, you know, I was next to Elvis or I was next to Tom Cruise. I mean, I ran into a huge celebrity that night, and it was... my jaw dropped, if you didn't notice.
It was when I first, even though I had been living in L.A. For 5 years or so at that point, it was the first I really understood the power of television. I should explain to the listeners who didn't see it, and that's probably most people, since it was 30 years ago or so, I only did like a 2-minute segment on the show, or 5 at the most. And the next year, I was at a convention, and a magician came up to me, a stranger, and said, "May I shake your hand?" I said, "Okay, what's the prank?" I'm thinking to myself. He said, "Hi." He said, "I just wanted to shake the hand of someone who had been on World's Greatest Magic."
Aww.
And I thought, wow, that was, a year ago that was a single one-time 3 to 5 minute piece, and he remembered it.
Tom, that was a great show, though. That whole...
And it was a great series, yes. Gary Ouellette from Canada was the producer, and it was really the first of the non-single celebrity magic specials. In other words, Copperfield had his specials back in the day. Christopher had his, and of course, Copperfield's. Did I say that, or did I say Hennings? Anyway, they were all single. This was the first that was a themed variety magic special that I know of. And I always tell people that I was on World's Greatest Magic, the second special, so I was on the world's second best magic.
Oh, come on now. No,
show.
No, that's not true.
But you notice the title. It's not the world's best magicians. It's the world's greatest magic.
Right.
So what they did was, for the series, they sought out people who were known for doing a particular trick, or they had invented a trick. And in the first special, they had not done any close-up. And the second, and Max Maven was one of the magic advisors for it, and they weren't planning to put close-up in the second because, if I remember correctly, was it Matt King who was the interim magician between other magicians?
Yeah, because he had the School of Magic. He was teaching little kid magic tricks.
And that was more close-up stuff. So they weren't going to have close-ups, but they were running a little short after they had done all of the stage acts. And Gary asked Max who he would recommend, and he said, "Well, I can give you several names." He said, "But I suggest it be a close-up person to offset all of the, floating girls and vanishing helicopters." And Gary, I sent him a tape, and he liked it, and the rest was history.
Wow. Well, And you went down in history that night, man. In the magic lore that is, I mean, you'll always be a part of that. It's so awesome.
And it's funny because I would not even consider at this. Well, I mean, if they offered, I would do Penn and Teller, but which is the modern equivalent of that. I think even more so than the Masters of Magic on the CW. Because there's not a thing in my act. Anyone who's ever seen me or seen any of my videos on YouTube, it's all the classics of magic. My forte has always been the comedy routines to standard tricks.
Yeah.
So there would be nothing in my repertoire that would fool that duo. Not only the fact that we all grew up together at the same time in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. How'd you end up going from Philly to L.A.?
I'd gotten to a point in my career. I knew by my junior year in college that I was going to be a professional magician, because at that point my summer job was working in a sideshow with a all-student attended circus. And I realized that even if it was I shouldn't say only a circus magician, but what I mean by that is out in the mud every day magician, I could still make a living as a magician. After that, it led to 3 years of doing school assemblies across the country. I guess to about 36 of the states.
Wow.
And in the mid-'70s, my career had gotten to a point that I had done full-year tours up to that point. And magic as a close-up magic, there was not really a market for yet. It was around, but there weren't a lot of strolling magic gigs, per se. In other words, there were close-up magicians in restaurants, but you didn't have a corporate guy calling you to see if you could do their cocktail party for an hour at their Christmas party. That market hadn't really gelled yet. And the stage act, I wasn't a bird act, and I wasn't an illusion act, and that's what they were using in Vegas. So I knew I was in that in-between ground of exactly what parlor show is. It's bigger than close-up. It's smaller than the big stage magic. But I was in Reading, Pennsylvania, near Reading, Pennsylvania. I was actually in a farm community called Douglasville, Pennsylvania. You're not going to have a career there. So when I got off my last year tour, 78, I guess, I realized that meant, and of course, Lord help me, videotape didn't even exist yet.
Wow.
So you couldn't send a client even a Betamax videotape. I had my first tape was on a 3/4-inch tape that I hired the people to come from the Philly TV, one of the TV stations, to come out and tape me at a comedy club, just so I had something to show. But agents didn't have players in their studios.
Right.
So it meant, since they couldn't see me, to the agents forgive me, big time, in quotes, that meant I had to move to New York, LA, or Chicago. Chicago was primarily toward trade shows, which were a little too structured for me. I didn't like the idea of standing in a suit for 8 hours a day pitching a product, and I don't think I would have been very good at it. The ones who do it, who have made a successful career, I admire very much, because they're great that they can. You would think with my background in a sideshow that I would be used to saying, come over here, take a look at this.
Right.
But
it's very much very different.
So to answer your question, after 15 minutes,
Oh, you're good.
I had to go to New York or LA if I wanted to pursue a career. New York, I already had a couple of agents there, and I knew that if I moved to New York, if I failed, if it was too close and too easy for me to crawl back to Douglasville, Pennsylvania,
I get where you're going.
and become the English teacher that I had the degree for.
Right.
Or I could throw everything into L.A. I already had worked the Magic Castle by that point. I had no agents out here, but fortunately it was the 80s, and I'll explain that in a second. But that's the choice I took. Also, at that point, L.A. was considerably cheaper to live than New York City. They're about on a par now. But fortunately, it was the 80s. And for those of you who are alive back then...
I was alive back then. Barely, but I was there.
Remember that, but the Reagan years, as I think of them, corporate magic was everywhere. There was lots of money. It was before the recession that happened after, well, at that point, before the tax law changed, near the end of Reagan's second term, entertainment was 100% deductible as an expense.
Wow.
So...
Oh my gosh.
So I remember one of my first corporate shows here in L.A. was for a realty company. And it was a breakfast meeting. And I thought, they're going to have entertainment at breakfast? Well, they did because they could. The expense was write-offable. And I said to him, I met the head of the agency early, of course, as I was setting up. And I said, this is a very impressive, buffet breakfast setup. That cart that has 20 or 30 carafes of orange juice on ice. I mean, it just, boom, it was huge. And he said, it better be impressive. It cost me, and I forget what it was per carafe. I did some arithmetic in my brain and realized he had paid more for the orange juice than he had for me.
Oh my goodness.
And that's when Tommy adjusted his prices from Douglasville prices to Los Angeles prices. Professional fees.
There you go.
Dum from the country. Out now.
But if you remember, there was a point then after that recession, which is in 89 or so, corporations booking. So I mean, because I was able to become successful quickly. First of all, because I kept my mouth shut. Hard as that is to believe. When I first came here, I moved literally across the street from the Magic Castle parking lot.
Wow.
So that I could be there every night, kept my mouth shut, and just listened to the local pros to hear who was booking, who were the agents, which agents don't you want to work with, how do you get into the theme parks, that sort of stuff. And the castle took a liking to me, so I was performing there, not regularly, but, once every 3 to 4 months, and so about 4 times a year. And there was so much money in the corporate world at that point because of the tax credit that they would get, that I was getting at least 3 good shows a week without advertising.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Wow.
It's just, and you didn't mind giving shows to your buddies because you knew you'd have another show right behind it, and they'd give you their overflow. It was a great time for the non-famous professional magicians in major cities.
Well, see, I'd heard, I worked at a magic shop when I was going to college, and I'd heard that the 80s were just fantastic, and the 90s, it started to come back a little bit. You know, I graduated in 96, but from high school. But
You're a baby!
It was starting to come back. It was starting to come back, they say, but they say it's nothing like it was in the 80s. So it's fascinating to have a reason for that. That tax credit could have been the reason. Was the reason.
I would do also the amount of automation. The businesses just aren't that large anymore. I mean, I used to do the aerospace industry. Boeing used to be here in Los Angeles, well, down in Long Beach, and they would have their Christmas party. There'd be 1,000 people there.
Wow.
And they'd hire 6 magicians. And we'd get together, you know, in the lobby before the show and say, okay, which ones are you doing? Who's doing ring, you know, the key wallet?
Yeah, ring flight. Yeah.
Ring flight, thank you. Who's doing this? Who's doing that? So that we're not all doing the same exact routines. And there's a magician guy that, well, he's gone, so I'll tell the story. Ricky Dunn was a hypnotist and magician.
Yes.
God bless him. And he told me that when he would get one of these gigs with 8 or 9 magicians, he'd meet with the host. The host would meet with us all and set us out. He would then go into the men's room, get out of his tuxedo, because we all wore tuxes in those days still. He would put on a businessman suit. And he would then go out and just join the party. And then a half hour before the end, he would go back and change into his tux when we'd all get back together to be handed our checks.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, you can't be serious. And he said, Tom, how many times has the host or hostess said to you, I'm sorry I was so busy, I didn't get to see you work, but I heard you were great. And I said, that happens all the time. And he said, yes. After I discovered that, he said, instead I spend the time walking around saying, have you seen that magician, Ricky Dunn, who's here? I hear he's fantastic.
Oh, my
and then he
goodness.
goes over to another party room.
Wow.
So at the end, the host is handing out all the checks, and he gets to Ricky and says, I don't know what you do, Ricky, but everyone's talking about you.
Wow.
That's funny.
Now, I don't know whether Ricky actually did that, or whether it's an apocryphal story, but I never had the guts to try something like that.
It makes for a great story. Let's just leave it like that.
Yeah.
It would have worked. The point is, it would have worked in the 80s, because many, many gigs, there would be at least 4 magicians.
Wow.
Because the offices were larger, the parties were larger. They'd take over 2 ballrooms in a hotel. So after the tax, I think it went down to 50%. It may have even gone as low as 40% deductible. And you could see it by the mid-90s that between that and the major companies, well, here, a lot of them moved out of town, but also if a major industry leaves or downsizes, that means all of their supply businesses are going to downsize. So it just went all the way down the chain from Boeing to the catering company that worked with Boeing to whether or not they're going to hire a magician, and so on down. People, instead of having 6 to 8 pieces in a live band, you'd be lucky if you'd have a soloist and a drummer. And then, of course, today it's almost all DJs, because it's even cooler to have a DJ now than it is to have live music. So, yes, that part of the business changed completely, but I moved to LA to experience that, and it's probably only because it was that period that I was able to come here and establish a career with no money in the bank when I moved here, basically.
Wow, what a scary thing. I mean, I got Natalie supporting me every step of the way, and helps me in my guideposts. If I'm going left or right, she steers me back in the right direction. Just going out there by yourself and figuring it all out, man, that was gutsy. That had to be scary.
Scary? No, to be honest, because I had done uncertain, yes, but not scary, because I knew worst come to worst, I could always go back, because back there I rented, my parents owned the place that I rented before I moved out here, so I knew I'd have a place to go back to, and I knew how to do kiddie birthday parties if I was going to be the magician who lives locally and just, what does Gene Anderson, the guy famous for the Torn and Restored newspaper?
Right.
He calls them weekend warriors.
Yeah.
And he also calls them, I think it's part-time pro.
Right.
Because remember, his credo is, you're not an amateur magician, you're not a hobbyist magician. If you're being paid, you better be professional. It's just that you've chosen not to do it as your career.
Right. Yeah.
So I would always have that somewhere. But I probably didn't have time to worry about it, because I was suddenly in the town. My God, I was in Los Angeles. And I'm a theater person, and I'm a music person, and the concerts and the theater and the sightseeing and museums that were all available to me in LA, or would have been in New York, it was just exceptional, being in your late 20s and suddenly, for the first time, having that at your disposal. That, am I doing anything today? No, I think I'll drive to San Diego. I mean, it was very liberating to be here.
Yeah. And beautiful, and the weather's great.
Yeah, because it also threw me into a place that opportunities were available. That if they weren't even available beyond a certain level of, in a rural place. Now, the same could have happened probably in Chicago or New York or Miami or anything that would be really considered a major city as opposed to a regional city.
But your time going out there had nothing to do with like a pilgrimage for Di Vernon or any of that stuff. Did you hang out with Di or get any of his wisdom? I mean, his was mostly magic, not any marketing or business tips.
Oh, yes. I of course, knew Di and was friendly with Di, but no, I was not one of his circle.
Yeah.
Inner circle. Because I'm not a card technician.
Right.
I'm competent, I'm good with cards, but I don't care which shuffle or pass I use, what method I'm going to use, as long as the trick fools people and they don't see the sleight. I don't want to get into a hardcore discussion of whether the side palm or this which one is better.
Hey, you won't get that from me. I tell you 100%. But there are some technicians out there that bore the pants off of you. Their stuff is beautiful.
There are technicians who are entertaining as well, and the ones who circled around Di were as well.
Right.
Bruce Servan, John Carney, Larry Jennings. I mean, these guys were sensational technicians, but also entertainers.
Entertainer's the important part. That's what I'm trying to get to. Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I was not hero worship. I was scared to even try to get into that circle because I still to this day don't think I ever was good enough to have been in that circle. You know, to sit at the knees of the master. I don't think I ever would have felt comfortable if I've been in Chicago of being at the Marlowe table.
Right.
You know, at his legendary meetings. But it was great to watch him. I'll tell you, here's my first Vernon story. So after the first time I played the castle, he wasn't there. It just turned out it happened to be a FISM week, and it was a week that the Larsons had taken him with them to Europe. But when I moved to LA 2 years later, he was certainly there, and I don't know if it was my first show, but it was an early show. And anybody who knew my work back then, it was the era of Steve Martin prop comedy. Gallagher was huge. Carrot Top sort of acts were big, of doing things with silly props. And that's what my close-up magic was at that point. If you can do, I figured, for instance, if you can do 2 in the hand, 1 in the pocket with $50, why can't I do it with rubber plastic cockroaches?
There you go.
You know, because they keep coming back and coming back.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
It made sense. So, and I did lots of silly things like that. I used to change a Clark Kent doll into a Superman doll. Or the other way around. But those are the sillier things. The magic technique underneath was solid, but it wasn't just the tricks. So I knew Vernon would hate me.
Oh.
So he finally comes in to see me, and of course, he sits in the center of the first row, sits there with his arms crossed.
Of course.
And back then, the cigar in his clenched to the teeth. And the show finishes, he gets up, he goes out for the rest. So I finally decide between shows I have to go over to the Vernon corner to get his judgment.
Get your notes.
And he said to me, actually, that's where it came from. I forgot. Till right now, the cockroaches came from Vernon.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Because he said, your stuff is very funny. You know what you need in your act? So I said, I don't know, Di, what? He said, cockroaches. Everybody can relate to cockroaches. Everywhere. I have them in my place. You get rid of them and they still come back.
Oh,
That's
goodness.
great.
I thought, okay. And I didn't know whether he was spoofing me or not. So I went the next day, to Hollywood Magic. And went into their little toy store section. Actually, I went to Hollywood Toys next to Hollywood Magic. And bought some of the rubber bugs. And he came back later in the week, saw me do the same routine, which was 2 in the hand, 1 in the pocket. My routine's in, I guess, my second set of lecture notes. My third set of lecture notes. Third time's the charm, I remember. Because it was done with 3 coins. Third time's the charm. But I did the exact same routine, but with the cockroaches, and it ended with the production of a giant cockroach. Okay? And he just got this huge smile on his face, and afterwards said, "I told you it would work."
That's awesome.
So I guess I did get some personal instruction from Vernon after all.
Wow,
Yeah.
wouldn't you think, was it a pinky count? No. No, you let people guess at a convention.
It's a cockroach move.
That's
When
great,
you
man.
stop to think about it, the time that I came up in Magic was an extraordinary time. It was the end of the years of Milburn Christopher being the having the largest library, the Christopher Library. Charlie Miller is at the castle. Vernon. Who, I'm trying to remember all of the great magicians of that era who had come to the castle because Vernon was there. They were also there, and
Well, you said Skinner. The only name I haven't heard you mention is Michael Lamar. Michael Lamar always talks about sitting at Vernon's feet.
well, and rightly so. I mean, anyone should. As I said, I was scared to do it.
Yeah.
I was scared to be accepted, to see if I would be accepted into it, so it was easier just for me to avoid it. But I'll tell you my first Michael Amar story. It was a cruel and horrible thing for me to do.
Uh-oh.
I can't wait. That sounds good already.
Fortunately, we're very good friends now. I was performing at an IBM convention in Washington, D.C. And
Ring 50. I'm a member there.
And okay. And I remember I was upset. At that time they were doing a thing called the little shows because they wanted shows to reflect parlor acts, since that's what most magicians do. So I was on the bill with Harry Reiser and another magician that does our size of material. And I remember I was getting known for my three ring routine at the linking ring routine at the moment. But Reiser, it was his signature trick. So I remember the convention because I had to bow out and do something else. And I forget what it was that I wound up. And in any case, it was at that convention that this, at that time, young Michael Amar would have been 20 or so, maybe, he might have been 18. But with the accent firmly West Virginian, and he said, because I had done close-up as well at the IBM convention, so he came up to me and said, "Mr. Ogden, may I show you a trick?" And I said, "Sure." And he did a signed card inside of Ice Cube.
Okay.
So that after the card I had signed disappeared, he brought out another card case, bicycle box, opens it up. Inside is an ice cube the size of the box, and inside it is the card. Amazing.
Pretty darn good.
And he said, "What do you think, Mr. Ogden?" And I said, "Never show that to anyone again. But could you show it to me one more time?" It's the same way when I first saw, boy, I am sounding old when I'm telling stories about people who are almost my age. First time I saw Paul Gertner, I was working at a trade show. I was still on the circus at that point, and they had me go to the booth to book the Eastern Fair circuit. So they had some entertainment in their booth. And the second day there, someone came up and said, "Did you know there's a magician in the other hall as well?" I said, "No." They said, "It's some kid." I said, "Oh, I'll go over and see him." So I go over. Now, you have to remember, at this point, I was 22, 23. And the kid was, I think he was still in high school or had just graduated. In any case, he was doing cups. This was the convention was in Pittsburgh.
Mm.
He was doing cups and balls with ball bearings.
We just had him on the podcast 2 weeks ago. What a great act!
And I went over, introduced myself, told him how Paul. Of course, we're talking about Paul Gertner for those of you who are not magicians who are listening. And I said, Paul, this is incredible. Now, this is thinking like a professional, even at a young age. I said, why are you at this convention? This is for fairground acts. They don't use close-up magic at fairs. And he said, no, but it's a market I'm not a part of, and I should be familiar with it. And he said, who knows who else is not connected with fairs, but might be with trade shows or something else who is here might see me. And I said, makes absolutely sense. And the reason he was, of course, doing with ball bearings is because they were ball bearings from Pittsburgh steel.
Right.
And indeed, that was one of his first, sponsors. So, or clients, I should say, not sponsors. But it has been very interesting every so often that I can remember back to the first time I saw people who are now the mainstream of magic. And have taken over master spots. Paul, of course, you just talked to him, you said, probably told you all about his salon of magic shows that he's doing up there in Boston now.
Yeah. I told him he needs to put out a DVD because we're gonna go see it when we get up there. But I want to see a copy of last year's show. I want this year's. I want something in my archives because I can't always get to Boston.
Oh, talk about archives. We were all off for about a year because of the pandemic. And when I got my first strolling gig to go back and do a show, there was one routine that I couldn't remember the pattern. I remember the trick, and I knew I used to do a joke at that spot in the trick, and I couldn't remember it. So I went to look at a videotape, and I discovered I don't have a single videotape of me doing close-up magic.
What?
You need to fix that.
Since 2000.
Wow.
And the ones I have are from back when I was doing the magic conventions in the 80s and 90s. So most of it is that weird stuff. I was doing, for instance, I did a routine with the paddles that flies appeared on them, that they would jump from one paddle to the next. But they were I made them like little miniature fly swatters.
That's funny.
That kind of stuff was on the tape. I had that.
You don't want to do trade shows, but you would be great for like a Red X company. You could do the roaches and you could do the fly swatters.
Oh, yeah. If I went to the right companies and said, just send them a clip of that one trick.
No, you got the roaches and the fly swatter.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think it was more just not wanting to stand for 8 hours.
Oh, I get it. It's brutal. It's tough, man.
Yeah.
And now I was talking to Paul about it 2 weeks ago. Now you got to stand out there for 2 hours yelling to try to get people's attention through a mask. So now you got to talk louder because they can't hear you, and you got the mask on for 8 hours. Yeah, God bless them. Yeah.
Also, I did a half a dozen very early in my career, and I discovered that what was work for me was not daytime, but the sales force kind of expected you to go out with them at night afterwards.
Yeah.
They'd go out and have a few drinks and talk and go to the sports bar and watch TV. And I wanted to say to them, guys, I got to be on my feet at 100% at 9 a.m.
But I've heard quotes from Bill Malone that says that's what solidifies him with the company, and that's where he makes better You know, we can do the sales. You can do your Christmas party as well. Yeah, I don't just do trade shows. And
absolutely.
So that's 24 hours a day for those 3 days. It's like a convention itself.
Right.
Like a magic convention. I'm up 3 days there. Sorry, that didn't make sense.
Absolutely. Back in the day when I used to go to all the conventions, you just didn't sleep for 3 days because, you get home next day, you block off the calendar so you can sleep.
Yep.
But that's also when I could go 24 hours and not feel the effect of it for 3 days. But I just knew that market wasn't right for me. But then I had other markets that other people, I think, may never even had considered. 2 years, I toured in the late 80s, early to mid-90s, somewhere in there. I toured for 2 seasons doing a solo children's theater show in planetariums.
Wow.
Across the country. It was framed by the Strassenberg Planetarium in Rochester, New York. The director at that time was a big magic fan, and he had gone as an attendee to a NICAN convention because it was held that year in Buffalo. Is that the one that's right across from Niagara Falls?
Okay.
Yes. He said, you should come back next year and do a show just at our science center, which I did. And then he said, you should come back next year to my planetarium and do a show. And I said, card tricks under the stars? How would that work? And he said, well, we've had shows already in here where we would, on a platform over one of the exits, we would put like a string quartet and would put a pin spot on them and then do the night sky above them. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. And he said, well, let me put one of my script writers on it and see what they come up with. And they wrote a show of a magician who had been going to the Universal School of Magic, and I was taking my final exam for the Universal Society of Magicians.
Wow.
And they were all done with special things they had created, visuals for the dome. And they tested me in the elements of earth, water, and fire. So I would do some water tricks, and they'd say, not bad, but can you do this? And then the lights on my stage would go down, and the top would darken, and there'd be thunder and lightning, and then it actually rained on the people, because in the dark, the people at the control board were squirting squirt guns over their heads, which was many people's favorite part of the show. And after I did a couple of fire tricks, they were very quick so that we didn't get smoke inside the dome. And then they would explode supernovas. And then they go off to decide, and then I break the fourth wall and say, gee, I hope they liked what I did. I didn't even get a chance to show them my best trick where I put them all together, earth, water, and fire, and I did Sands of the Desert, but I squirted a little lighter fluid on top of the bowl of water, so I had to reach through the fire into the water to get the earth.
Wow. I've never seen it with fire. That's awesome.
And, well, as long as you don't care whether you have hair on your forearm.
Arm hair, yeah. That doesn't. All right.
And you have a bowl that's not going to crack because of a temperature change. Make sure it's a Pyrex bowl.
Okay.
But they come back and they say, we've never seen anything like that. We're giving you your diploma. And suddenly a big ribbon that looks like a big blue ribbon appears in my hands, and it says on it in big letters, B.A. And I thought, I've graduated with a B.A., and they said, no, that stands for barely adequate.
Oh.
But I still graduated.
That's great.
So the pomp and circumstance comes up, and I do a parade around the circle of the planet. Oh, it was a 45-minute children's theater show in a blue gown with white star. Yeah,
That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
but now I could come out as a crotchety wizard and have a sorcerer's apprentice.
There you go.
But it was fun, and of course the bulk of my career was on cruise ships. I mean, I got into them I'd always wanted to do cruise ships, and had tried to book them before I moved to LA, but at that point they weren't doing cruises that kind of wander in an area. It was always 7 to 8 itineraries to the same spots, so everyone left every week from the cruise. As a result, they wanted the entertainers to stay on 6 months to a year, so they didn't have to fly them back and forth. When cruise lines realized that people had enough money and time to stay longer than 17 days on the ship, if after they did the Eastern Caribbean, they did the Western Caribbean. And so on. They would do the Western Mediterranean followed by the Eastern Mediterranean, and then maybe a side trip up to the Baltic.
Wow.
You know, that then they would have to fly us on and off. So, I was, at that time, one agency in New York, Bramson Entertainment Bureau, which isn't in existence anymore, booked all of the American-based cruise lines there were. And he said, we just don't have anything for you, Tom. I moved out here. I did a convention at sea. They had the first Magic Sea? What do they call the thing? But Magic at Sea. 2 travel agents out here who are amateur magicians and members of the castle put together, just like they have country western themed cruises and soap opera cruises. They had a magic cruise where we had taken a part of the suite, but we didn't get the entire ship. And part of the agreement was that we would do one show for the public. And I told the guy who put it together that I wanted to be on that show for the public. Now, I was on with that bill with, let's see, Marvin and Carol Roy.
What, Mr. Electric? Wow.
Right. I think on the cruise, certainly Di Vernon was there. Chuck Jones, I think, was on that one. Norm Nielsen may have been along that one as well.
Golly.
But anyway, it was because it was the first. They really top-loaded the acts. As it worked out, I, being Machiavellian, I was the only talk act on the public show. All of the others were doing Dove productions or Candles or whatever, Fantasio-style stuff. I was the only one who was getting an old lady up and doing a hat tear for the grandmother or doing egg bag with the little boy in the audience. The family stuff.
And playing off that audience, yeah, man.
Right. The second the show was over, the cruise director made a beeline for me because we did it on the dance floor rather than the theater, to me, and he said, "Why aren't you working cruises?" And I said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask Bramson Entertainment?" And he said, "I just talked to Joe last week. I will." 2 weeks later, I get a call on the phone from New York. "Tommy, baby, you want to go to Alaska for the summer?"
That's great, man. So how long are you doing cruises?
My first was around 83, and I retired from them around 2005. I
Wow.
would do 1 to 2 weeks, 7 to 10 days, about 2 every 3 months.
Wow.
And as a result, I've been to over 100 countries. I've been to all 7 continents. I've performed in just impromptu shows in some really unusual places, in ports for the people who came out to the ships. And I took advantage of it also in that if it's a place I really wanted to see, one of the times when the ship disembarked in Rome, which means they would have taken me straight to the airport and I would have flown home, I said to the cruise ship agency, I said, fly me home 10 days from then, and I'll take care of all the expenses in between. And they didn't care which day they sent me home.
Wow,
So then
that's awesome.
I did holiday on my own dime, so I got to actually see some of these instead of trying to see Rome in a day,
Right.
as cruise ship passengers have to.
So, if you were going on holiday now, though, would you want to take a cruise ever? Would you want to go back and do a cruise again, or are you done enough?
Oh, I would, but I'm not. I don't think my act is the style that they're using.
I'm
today.
saying no. I'm just saying as a vacation, going on a holiday.
Oh,
going
on
on
vacation. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, would you? Okay, all right. Some people just get sick of the water, and they're like,
I do see what you're saying. Oh no, I would. I loved being at sea.
okay, all right. Well, there you go. Some people get burned out on it. They're tired of the whole thing.
I forget which magician told me that's why there's so many drunk magicians.
Oh.
and I said, what? And this is very early after I moved here. He said, well, because you'll notice they're all the cruise ship magicians. He said, because there's nothing to do during the day.
Oh.
They've already seen all the movies, because these were the magicians, remember, who had to be on 6 months at a time. So they'd already seen all the movies that were on rotation in the TV in their cabin. They'd already been to all of the ports because they did the same 7 ports every week. So most of the time they just hung out with the piano bar guy and drank.
That's what I was afraid of doing a cruise ship. I was afraid
I don't know whether it's true.
I'd be stuck.
But because I went on with a completely different, because we're talking back, this was talking cruise ship magicians of the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Not today's group. And of course, back then, the ships were the size of the Love Boat. Remember, they were 1,200 seats. Passengers was a big ship.
Wow.
So there wasn't a lot to do. I mean, the attraction was sitting out and looking at the ocean. Today, in these mega ships, I just don't think my act would work on any ship where I would be performing next to the roller coaster.
Well, I mean, nowadays though they got the projection screens and everything. You could do a close-up set on the stage. You could do a parlor size stage, and they could project it.
It would have to be completely it would have to be relit. Basically, I was a stand-up comic who happened to have magic props in his hand.
Okay, all right.
That's that's pretty much my style. So it's kind of hard to flash that up.
Yeah.
You remember the first couple of years of America's Got Talent? They would sometimes say to a magician, "That's nice, but I don't see how that will play on a Vegas stage. It just wasn't big enough for them."
And I immediately hear that and I say, go see Matt King's show.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people love Mac. He's not doing anything big.
But I'll bet you that if he were doing the evening show instead of the afternoon show, he would be pressured to jazz it up somehow.
Yeah, I never thought of it. I don't even think you're in Vegas. I don't even know what time I'm watching the shows, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Flashier.
Yeah.
And to be honest, since I started, oh God, our time is almost over.
And I got so much to talk to you about.
What's that?
I said, I got so much to talk to you about. Go ahead, finish your sentence. Sorry.
Well, maybe I'll come on in a couple of more months.
Sounds great.
Again and finish up the whole second part of this, which led into, I wrote 2 instructional books on magic. The Complete Idiot's Guide to Magic Tricks, it was the competition book out at the same time as Magic for Dummies. And then I wrote, 5 years later, they asked me to make the Complete Idiot's Guide to Street Magic. That led to them asking me to write the Complete Idiot's Guide to Ghosts and Hauntings. Not a ghost hunting book, just a general information book. Now, I knew nothing about ghosts and hauntings. I knew Pepper's Ghost, and that was about it. And I'd seen some spook shows when I was little.
Pepper's Ghost is a magic technique, guys. Go ahead.
As a magic technique, not as, yes.
Right.
And I said, how much is the advance? And they told me, and I said, I know everything there is to know about ghosts, because they gave me a year and a half to write it, and I could research it. The first book, the internet was almost brand new at that point, so there wasn't a lot out there searchable. Most of my research was done with books and first-person stories. But that has led to, I'm just, let's see, 15th, 16th book on ghost stories.
Well, I have a list here. I want to get back to magic real quick. We only have 5 minutes left. The Complete Idiot's Guide to Magic, and then Complete Idiot's Guide to Street Magic. These books had great material considering their titles. I mean, do you have a favorite effect from those?
Don't have a favorite effect. What I'm proud of is they're not just the tricks. I wrote the book that I wish I had had when I was 13.
I agree. It's very good.
It teaches you how to write scripts, how to routine tricks, how to, make sure you wash your fingernails before you perform. I mean, it has all that stuff in it. It teaches you to be a magician, not just the tricks. So I'm very proud of that.
And your Complete Idiot's Guide to Ghosts and Hauntings, you have haunted cemeteries, haunted highways, haunted hotels, haunted Chicagos, haunted Hollywood, haunted DC, and more. That's just a bunch I just grabbed. Go to Tom...
And right now I'm working on the haunted hiking trails of Pennsylvania.
Oh, cool.
Wow. Go to tomogden.com to check all that out. And that's Tom, spelled traditionally, and then Ogden is O-G-D-E-N. tomogden.com. Tom, we're running out of time, man. You are the best. I want to talk about your sideshow career. I want to know if you ever did theme parks, because you mentioned theme parks. I'm like, yeah, you're right there. You're listening to all those people at the castle. I want to know if you did theme parks. We got to get you back on. You're awesome. And another cool thing about Tom that you guys might not know, we share the same birthday. So that makes him awesome already.
Oh!
And...
Happy birthday.
And
8 years younger than me in a few weeks.
And I want to know about your run on Days of Our Lives. Dude, if you had people wanting to shake your hand for...
It was fun.
If you want to have people shaking your hand from that Magic the television show, you had little old ladies probably running up to you and tackling you in the mall.
Yes, but there I wasn't honest Tom Ogden.
Shouldn't matter. Tom, you're the greatest. Thank you so much for your time, man. We will have you back on. Stay on the line real quick. I have a couple plugs. Check him out, guys. Okay. TomOgden.com. Get those books. Check them out. And our television show, Wes Iseli's Magiclife, is on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Android TV, and the Jewel TV app. Tons of other places. It's in over 100 million households and now in syndication, so check your local listings. And every Saturday and Sunday in October, Natalie and I will be performing at Round Hill Farm in Culpeper. Check out WesIsley.com for showtimes. And check out our merch at WesIsley.com. See you next week. Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Express Copy and Graphics. Mention promo code Wes Iseli to get 10% off. Their website is expresscopy.com. That's XPRESS-COPY.com. They do it all. Copies, banners, signs, vehicle wraps, promo items, practically anything you need printed, they can do it for you. These guys are great. Check them out. Check us out online at wesisley.com and patreon.com/Wes_Iseli for behind-the-scene videos, blooper videos, never-before-seen footage, discounts on merchandise, magic trick tutorials, and more. That's Wes Iseli, spelled W-E-S-I-S-E-L-I.